Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
The 2024 Stanley Cup has been awarded. The Florida Panthers are your champions. Welcome to NHL Wraparound. Vic and Neil with you, and we'll be joined shortly by our special guest, four-time Stanley Cup winner and former coach of the Edmonton Oilers, Craig MacTavish. But first, a word from MyGray.
From Howe to Hughes, from Bellevue to Bedard, we're your source for game-worn jerseys. Go to mygray.com, MEIGRAY.com to start your collection today. Get real. Get it from MyGray.
Well, Vic, finally the Stanley Cup has been won, but what's on your mind?
I think it's pretty simple. You know, last week I went on pretty strongly, and you agreed, as did Coach Montgomery of the Bruins, that the Panthers would then close this series out in 5 games. Unfortunately, I didn't have to bring the spatula out to get the egg off my face, because in Game 7, the Panthers finally delivered the game that we thought we were going to see in Game 5. They got their forecheck back. They got the scoring that they needed to from their big guns in Verhaeghe and Reinhart. And they got on the board first. And I think that got them back on the rails quickly. Their forecheck work and just a lot of components in their game seemed to come back together. The signatures of what the Florida Panthers were all about. And they were deserving winners last night in Game 7, despite the really heroic comeback by the Oilers just to get it to a Game 7.
Yeah, and I think the other part of this that has to be noted is that the Oilers didn't play the way they had played in the games 4, 5, and 6. They seemed to be tentative. They seemed to be a little bit more nervous. They allowed Florida to take the game to them. They allowed Florida to play their game, and Florida didn't allow the Oilers to play their game, as well as I just looked to me like the Oilers had a little bit of stage fright going into that game. But certainly a great series. It all came down to Game 7 and a 1-goal victory for the Panthers.
And certainly just by game's end, you could almost see that the tank was on empty for the Oilers, because Draisaitl didn't have a very good final. And even McDavid, the amount of time he played, that these guys were gassed in the last 5 minutes.
I'm sure they were, and I'm sure that the emotions were running so high. That's another thing that tires you out, as you know, when you get when you're really, really emotional. And the Oilers knew this was, for this group, this was the first time in their lifetime that they'd had the chance to win a Stanley Cup. For most of those players, not Corey Perry, no, but the rest of the team, that was the first time they'd had a chance to win a Stanley Cup. And I'm sure the emotions were running extremely high.
And we're going to pick up on this entire series shortly, as we're going to be joined by Craig MacTavish.
Now, my pleasure to bring back on to NHL Wraparound Craig MacTavish, the 4-time Stanley Cup winner, the last man who coached the Edmonton Oilers to a Game 7 before last night with Chris Knobloch. Craig, welcome back to NHL Wraparound.
Thanks, Neil and Vic. Pleasure to be on. Kind of unfortunate circumstances for Oiler fans. It's deja vu all over again, as Yogi said, right? But, what was a heck of a run here in Edmonton for sure.
The game last night, Craig, seemed to be that the Oilers were a little bit tentative, while the Florida Panthers seemed to come out and want to play their game and want to dictate how the game was going to go. It seemed, to me anyways, that the Oilers, for the first time in 4 games, became a little bit tentative in this game.
Well, they just it's sometimes it's hard to analyze why one team has a significant territorial advantage than the other team, but it generally comes down to what I saw last night, where Florida was controlling the puck in Edmonton's zone again, and really that was their strategy and successful strategy going into certainly games 2 and 3. I mean, the goaltender played great in game 1, but they've got big bodies with Barkov, Bennett, Tkachuk in behind the goal line, and you've got to break the cycles. You need guys that can separate the puck from the player, which is easier to do when you're dealing with guys of that size. It's much harder to separate them from the puck, and they controlled large portions of the game. And then when you dump the puck out, they just recollect themselves and go back again. I mean, a lot of it is depending on the quality of the breakouts, how quick he can get to the puck and get the puck moving. And we weren't able to apply as much pressure on Florida. They had a much easier time breaking the puck out, consequently getting over the red line, getting the pucks in deep, and then controlling the plays down low. And to me, that's what it looked like in games 2 and 3 when they did have success, and they really didn't get back to that in games 4, 5, and 6. We were able to break the puck out. We had a lot of speed in transition through the neutral zone, and then we were able to apply more pressure offensively on Bobrovsky. And as you and I have talked about before, it's all the zones are interconnected. If you have success on the breakouts and you clean up the breakouts, you're able to build speed in your attack, which backs off their defense, and then you get penetration, depth, and then the Oilers go to work where they're hard. They have a lot of guys that are hard to corner. I mean, the most elite is obviously McDavid. You can't corner him, but they really didn't have that penetration depth in the game from what I saw.
Craig, it also looked like Florida really simplified their game because they were turning a lot of pucks over at the Edmonton blue line in games 4 through 6, and it almost played right into the Oilers' rush game and their ability to counterattack. And in this game, they got the pucks in deep. They were able to apply a forecheck, and it just appeared that going back to the basic hockey that worked for them for the entire season finally paid off, and it wore the Oilers down in Game 7.
And and I think that's a direct byproduct of gap. And when you're turning pucks over at the offensive blue line, generally, 95 times out of 100, it's a byproduct of the opposition having good gaps, so you don't get that penetration depth. And then they were able to get to their game. It's really hard psychologically to predict what's going to happen in a game like that, and who has the psychological advantage. But if you could ever tap into it, you could make yourself a lot of money on trying to improve that, because it really was reminiscent of the way we played in 2006, the last time the Oilers went to the Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. We just never found our game. And was that because we just were off a little bit, or was it that Carolina or Florida were just on their game and made it more difficult for us to find our game? I believe it's the latter. You have to give them a lot of credit, Florida a lot of credit, and obviously Carolina a lot of credit for preventing the Oilers to find their game. And back in 2006, we had a team that was more capable of sustaining forechecks and pressure and physical play. We didn't have the high-end offensive talent that they had, but collectively we had a lot of depth on our team, and we could take the team to the opposition physically. But you have to give Florida a lot of credit for preventing Edmonton from getting going. I mean, and you carry that regret and remorse with you for a number of years. I still carry it from 2006, and that's 18 years later. I mean, I feel more disappointed by that now than I did after we lost. Okay, we had a heck of a run, and we fell a little short. But in hindsight, over time, most of those players never got back and never had another opportunity, and they deserved it. A lot of them: Ryan Smith, Fernando Pisani, Sean Horkoff, Ales Hemsky, Jason Smith, Rafi Torres. I mean, Jared Stoll. Jared Stoll got his cups in LA, but most of those guys never got another sniff. Ethan Morrow never got another sniff at a Stanley Cup. And, you see how beat up the players look at the end of a series on their faces. And energy is a finite commodity. And Edmonton looked like they ran out of it. Certainly their stars did late in the game, as they continually, and rightfully tasked them with trying to get the tying goal.
And I wanted to actually ask you about that just from a coaching perspective. Paul Maurice with the last change, and Alex Barkov was on McDavid for literally the entire night. I mean, granted, McDavid had that great chance from in close with about 7 minutes left, but that last change really seemed to be something Florida took advantage of, and it did appear to weigh on McDavid as the game went on into its late minutes.
Well, I mean, that guy, he's a Selke winner for a reason. I mean, he's big, he's strong, he's intelligent, he's skilled, and, he has deceptive speed. He's a big guy, so he's a hard-working skater. He doesn't look like a graceful skater, but he definitely gets there. And, you look at the job he did against Zibanejad in New York, too. I mean, he wrapped up a lot of really good players and made them muted their effectiveness. I mean, Connor still had his successes in Edmonton. I mean, he had a lot. And games 4 and 5, he had great success and took the team on his back and wouldn't let the team throw in the towel or quit. And they didn't. I mean, they have a lot of things to be proud of, that team. The resilience at this time during an arduous Stanley Cup run to come back from an 0-3 deficit is virtually unheard of. And, you have to give the coach a lot of credit for creating an environment that the players, wanted to continue in. And it is such a grind. You look at the gauntness of the players when you see their pictures and that on Stanley Cups. It's a tough grind. They call it the toughest trophy to win in sport. And that's one of the reasons, because especially the stars. I mean, you're playing and you have to deliver the goods. I mean, it's exhausting to be a superstar if you want to win a Stanley Cup. And Neil saw it firsthand with, Brian Leetch and Mark Messier and Kovalev and Adam Graves. I mean, it's a big responsibility to be a star if you want to win.
Craig, I know you've been coach of a Game 7 final, and I know you've played in one Game 7 final. Have you been involved in any other final, like when you played in Edmonton and so on? Did you ever?
Well, we played, as a player, I played in 4 or 5 Game 7s. Only really lost the one in Carolina as a coach. I mean, we won Stanley Cup in 1987 in Game 7. Played a few others, not in the Stanley Cup Finals, but won obviously in '94 in New York in Game 7. But it's now 13-5 for the home team in 18 Game 7, so it's pretty significant.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you one of the stats that I looked up before the game last night, and now I can use it after the game. Of the 18 final Game 7s, so 18 times the NHL final has gone to Game 7 in the history of the league, 15 of those times the loser got one or less goals. 15 of the 18 games, the loser had one or less goals in the game, which is pretty amazing, really, when you think about it. There's only been 3 games, including the one that we participated in, you and I, in New York, where it was a 3-2 victory. But there's only 2 others that went above 1 goal for the loser. And I guess my question is, what's your thoughts on that? Because what a clampdown that shows by the winner. Almost every single 15 Stanley Cup winners completely clamped down on the opposition to win that Stanley Cup.
Well, incredible stat, really. I mean, I never would have ever predicted that. 15 out of 18 games, 1 goal or less, that's amazing. And, I mean, everybody says defense wins championships, and is there any better statistical evidence of that than what you just said in that stat? And, I've always believed the offense is a bit fleeting. It comes and it goes, but the defense is there for you every night if you want it. And defense and smart, intelligent defensive hockey, managing the risk and reward relative to the time and the score, and all that stuff that most of these teams all have when you get to this point, because they face elite opposition along the way. But wow, that stat is amazing. And, it's, I don't know whether that would have helped the Oilers to know that going in, but once they got 2 goals, you pretty much knew statistically you were done. And once Carolina scored that second goal, which was, in my mind, a pretty significant tactical error on the second goal to allow Reinhart the opportunity to get inside those dots in a tight area. And, it was a little bit of a man advantage rush in Florida's favor at the start. And the way I always looked at those things were, there are primary and secondary threats, but, they change as the rush proceeds towards the attacking net. And so Reinhart's on the outside. He's on the right side on the outside. He bought a little time to get the middle lane drive, which maybe that guy's the primary threat, the guy without the puck in the middle. But once Reinhart starts improving his angle, then he becomes the primary threat, and you better get out and you better defend him. You can't give him that shot. And Kulak, he retreated to the middle, to try and help out with that middle lane drive. But ultimately, I thought he had to expand out earlier on Reinhart and not give him that good luck. But sometimes that's all it takes, and that was the case the other night.
Hey, Craig, to Neil's point also, just regarding how few goals the losing team winds up getting in these Game 7s, I think you could also attribute it that the deeper teams get into the playoffs, they're there for a reason. And that reason is they understand how to close.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You understand how to close or you get closed. It's one or the other. And, the competition gets so elite that, you have to play at a higher level than you've ever played at before in a year to win. And teams force you to get to that higher level or you get eliminated. And Vancouver did a great job of that with Edmonton. Edmonton's game grew a lot. It grew again against Dallas. They're pretty elite competition too as well. And they had to tighten it up and be at their best and limit the mistakes. And I think the lesson that a lot of teams learn when they get to the Stanley Cup finals and lose is that you have to eliminate any mistakes out of your lineup. If there's a player or 2 players that are vulnerable or susceptible to blunders and errors, you have to eliminate, you have to improve in your personnel. And Neil would know more about that than me, but you can't have those consistent mental breakdowns in your lineup, or you're going to lose. And not that we had too many, we had it dialed up pretty tight, but there's a few areas we could shore it up going into next year.
Last one from me. It's somewhat remarkable the amount of games coached between these two coaches in this final. Paul Maurice, second most number of games coached in NHL history, only behind Scotty Bowman, and takes him 26 years to win his first Stanley Cup. And Chris Knobloch took over for Jay Woodcroft early in the season, did a remarkable job, and boy, he rolled a lot of sevens in this series before going down last night. What impresses you most about him and what he can take into the season? Because Florida, obviously, they had the growing pains. They lost in the final last year. Now it seems that perhaps the Oilers are the team that's going to take that next step. What does Knobloch do, and what impresses you most for him to be able to get to the Oilers to the next place?
I think it's largely a confirmation of his overall belief in how the game needs to be played. And his approach to motivating players, deploying strategy, initiating tactical changes. I think he can't help but get through this with a lot more confidence in his deliverable to the Edmonton Oilers and the Edmonton Oilers players. I mean, I don't know whether there's regrets that he would have. He seemingly had the Midas touch on all the personnel changes that he made. And I would think that he would not have a lot of regret in his approach to the game. Paul Maurice, I mean, you have to give both of these guys a lot of credit. There has to be resilience for LA to come up in games, or for Florida to come up and win Game 7. And I think Paul Maurice and all his experience had a good dialogue with his players and obviously said the right things to them to get them to a higher level than what they were at in Games 4, 5, and 6. I mean, I love listening to Paul Maurice. I think he's got a great perspective on the game that only a guy with the experience that he has can bring. I mean, I saw Billy Zito was, feeling the pressure. I mean, Neil, I'd ask him that question, whether he ever started throwing stuff in the press box. I never remember him doing much of that in the finals, because as a player, I don't know what message that sends to the team when you visibly demonstrate that you're being affected by the pressure. But I mean, it all worked. He did an amazing job. Bill Zito did an amazing job. I mean, it was a great trade that he made, obviously, to get Matthew Tkachuk, just an ultimate warrior. And I mean, those Tkachuk boys are just built for those types of games. But I mean, I don't really remember Neil throwing too much around, but I might be wrong.
I just think I stayed out of the camera. I think you guys as players in '94 had to worry about the other guy losing his mind more than me, the guy behind the bench.
Absolutely.
But a real quick one for you, because Vic sort of touched on what I was going to say, and I'll just make this one quick for you, Craig. In my observations of teams that go to the final, and you and I have talked about this before. We talked about 2006. We talked about Peter Laviolette winning the Stanley Cup and then never coaching Carolina to a playoff game again after that. And then being let go and went on to have a great career. But the Carolina Hurricanes, nevertheless, in the aftermath of winning that cup, never made it back. And I think you also said that your Oilers, which I had not remembered this, didn't get to the playoffs. One thing that I found remarkable about the Panthers is that they won the President's Trophy 2 years ago. The next year, which was Maurice's first year, they had a pretty tough regular season. They squeaked into the playoffs. They could have been gone in the first round, and they came back from 3-1 down, and we know they went to the final against Vegas. To me, a lot of teams that go through that would have probably come out this season a little bit cocky and not had a great year. That's just the way I've seen teams go. This team came out and had a fantastic year and won the, other than the Rangers, they were the second best team in the East, and then end up going right through the playoffs. And we've talked about the whole thing. The Oilers had a real tough start to their season, with a stellar cast of players, but then had this incredible run all the way through to the final and was within a goal of the Stanley Cup. I guess it's a long way of asking you, what do you see for the Oilers now? Because you know how tough it is to go through the summer they're going to go through now, having gotten so close but couldn't get there. And now they go, oh my God, April seems like it's 10 years from now. And I want to get back to April. I want to play the playoffs right now. I don't want to go through the regular season. What goes on there, Craig? And what for both teams? What do you envision for both teams?
Well, my experience tells me be careful on the amount of changes you make with the group. I mean, when you have wholesale changes, we lost Pronger, which was a pretty significant piece back in the day after that Stanley Cup run. And I don't really think Florida made that many changes after 2023. I think they kept this team pretty much intact. And I think that's the danger, that the changes, obviously you're making those changes to improve your team, but be real careful that, you're not interrupting the chemistry of the team or affecting the chemistry of the team. As for Edmonton, we had more depth this year than we had. We had that emergence of Janmark, played unbelievable in the playoffs. He looked like Pavel Bure at times, and at no point in his career has he ever been called Pavel Bure, or Pavel Datsyuk. Yeah, but he was unreal, and Henrique was good. It'll be tough to keep Henrique, I would imagine, based on salary cap and so forth. He's a wonderful piece to have in your lineup. I'd love to see him on the Oilers roster next year. Brown will be another guy that'll be a very tough call for the management of the Edmonton Oilers. But those guys, they really delivered the goods. So, I would say to your question, you'd be careful of the changes you make. And it doesn't transfer from year to year. The year we won the Stanley Cup in 1990 was a great example of that in Edmonton. We had the kid line, and it was Adam Graves, Joe Murphy, and Martin Gelinas. And that line was as dominant as the Gretzky line was, or the Messier line was in their prime. They were they were so effective. They just, they territorially, they killed every team they played. They were unbelievable. The next year, nothing. You put that line down on paper, you thought, okay, they're going to be unreal for the next year. Nothing. They didn't have the same chemistry for whatever reason that they had in the playoffs. So, it doesn't always follow from year to year, but I would be careful on the amount of changes that you make. And you're so close. Give that team another chance if you don't win it.
Craig, thanks for coming on again. And the couple other times you're on with us, we really appreciate it. And I love hearing your expertise, and your background is so extensive in coaching and managing and playing. We could keep you on here for all day long. It'd be a lot of fun to do that, but we really appreciate having you on, and look forward to seeing you whenever I can get you to come to South Carolina.
I can't wait, Neil. I'll be there next November. Turn my bed down.
We'll make sure we do that. Thanks again, Craig.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, Craig. And now we're going to hear a word from our sponsor at MyGray.
Time now for a quick shout out to our sponsor. NHL Wraparound is brought to you by MyGray, your source for game-worn jerseys. Head to mygray.com to get your collection started today. Get real, get it from MyGray. NHL Wraparound subscribers can take 10% off any hockey jersey when they order at mygray.com and use the coupon code WRAP10. Don't forget that coupon code WRAP10.
Welcome back to NHL Wraparound. It is Vic and Neil with you. And a reminder that our website is up and running, NHLWraparound.com. All of our episodes are available, so please check us out. So now the offseason begins, and even prior to the final being completed, Neil, there's been some very interesting transactions. And just on Monday, the Bruins dealt Linus Ullmark to Ottawa for goaltender Joonas Korpisalo, forward Marcus Stellick, and the 25th pick in the draft. And a lot of people in Boston kind of underwhelmed with the return that the Bruins were able to get. I guess Ottawa could not sign Ullmark to an extension, and he's an unrestricted free agent after next season. So what do you see with this deal so far?
Well, I think that Don Sweeney and the Boston Bruins wanted to get some salary cap relief. Even with the Korpisalo contract, the Ottawa kept some money there. So they bought themselves some relief. So I think that it's hard to judge these trades based upon the value of the player, the way that we used to look at it, and whoever is the best player type thing. I think Ullmark clearly is the best player in this trade, but there wasn't a lot you can get for a guy who says, no, I'm not going to re-sign. I'm going to become a free agent. And they really wanted to get that salary cap room, I think, was the issue.
So the big hug is now gone between Ullmark and Swayman, probably one of the better optics around the NHL. Here's a trade that has kind of been somewhat baffling. Last week, Pierre-Luc Dubois went from the Kings to Washington in exchange for Darcy Kemper, who won the Stanley Cup with Colorado in 2022 and never really found his game in Washington. And what I find interesting here is that a lot of people are lauding General Manager Rob Blake of the Kings for offloading Dubois' contract, which is for, I think he signed it for like 8 years and $8.5 million. That was the problem for me in the first place of why he signed Dubois for such a huge sum of money, because to me, the guy's been an albatross since he came into the league. He was the third pick overall for Columbus in 2016, talked his way out of Columbus, talked his way out of Winnipeg, signs big in LA, and this baffles me really more from a Washington perspective. Maybe they think that, they can catch lightning in a bottle here, because this guy certainly underperformed his entire career.
Yeah, I don't know what they're thinking, but what I'm theorizing in my own head is that it might have something to do with Ovechkin and trying to keep Alex Ovechkin surrounded with good talent so as he runs to get that record, the Gretzky record of goals scored. I don't think that they want to rebuild because of Ovechkin being there, and they don't want to put on a whole rebuild, sort of like what's going on in Pittsburgh with Crosby, but we'll get to that another time. That's a whole nother story. But I think that perhaps General Manager McClellan, maybe felt that he just couldn't resist trying to pull the talent out of Dubois that other teams haven't been able to find.
Do you really see it in his game, though? Because I find too many nights he's just a guy that I don't notice on the ice. He's never hit 30 goals, career high 63 points. So his numbers are modest at best. And I don't know, like we just said, is he trying to get, catch lightning in a bottle here with him? Because his numbers have been generally underwhelming.
Oh, they have been. And listen, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't take him. I wouldn't take on that money. And I don't even think I'd take on that player. But McClellan must have reasons that he wanted to do that and reasons he wanted to get him there. Obviously, Kemper has not been what he thought he was going to get when he signed him. So he was able to offload him the same way that the Kings are offloading their guy. But again, I wouldn't have taken on that commitment, but we'll see. We'll see if he's right.
I hope we're doing this long enough to say that in 3 to 4 years, this feels like a buyout waiting to happen. So we'll see. Okay, so another deal. The Devils finally get their guy. Jacob Markstrom was rumored to be going over to the Devils late last year, around the deadline as the Devils try to make a push to get into the playoffs, which didn't materialize. So they get Markstrom. They give up defenseman Kevin Dahl and a first-round pick in 2025. I think the cautionary tale here is, do the Devils really believe they have solved all of their problems? There's a lot going on with that team last year. They lost Dougie Hamilton. They lost Jack Hughes. And then, of course, Michael McLeod and Cal Foote were implicated in the sexual assault case up in Canada. So a lot to put together with this team.
Yeah, and then, of course, don't forget they also fired the coach, and now they've got a new coach going in there this season.
Sheldon Keefe,
So, Sheldon Keefe goes in from Toronto. So that's another question mark sort of thing. He's a good coach. He's not, you can't question his coaching, but question how that fit will be. Markstrom's a good goalie. I'm underwhelmed by what Calgary Flames got for Markstrom, though. With the amount of goaltenders needed out there, i.e. Toronto Maple Leafs, lights flashing. Couldn't they have gotten more than they got from the New Jersey Devils? And did the Calgary Flames not trade Markstrom to Toronto because they didn't want to trade him to Brad Treliving? Is there something there? I don't know, but sometimes that stuff plays into it. I think it's a great thing for the Devils, and I'm curious as to why Calgary could only get what the Devils gave them.
I think that this is a move that will get the Devils back in the playoffs, because that's one team that, 2 years ago, they really surprised so many teams in the NHL. They knocked out the Rangers in the first round, and a lot of people thought they were going to take the next step this season, and that didn't materialize. So this could be the classic case of taking one step forward or one step back before you take 2 steps forward. One other move that I know you've had some strong opinions on, and that is Barclay Goodrow getting waived by the New York Rangers and getting claimed by his former club in San Jose.
Yeah, a very peculiar move by Mike Greer and the San Jose Sharks, taking Goodrow off waivers when the Rangers were probably going to buy him out of the remaining contract. There's a lot of money there. He's being paid. His AAV is 3.6, but this season he makes $5 million. That's just the way the contract is structured, and then it goes down in 25-26 and down again drastically in 26-27. It's quite a big nut for them to grab and put into the lineup. People can say, well, they're trying to reach the floor, but isn't there better ways to reach the floor than to take a third or fourth line player and overpay him as a character guy? He is a character guy, and I like him as a player, but he's way overpaid, and they probably could have signed him once the Rangers bought him out. So I don't quite understand why the Sharks did what they did.
And the Rangers certainly get out from under that contract, and that's significant for them, heading into free agency, which is going to start on July 1st.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to shift gears now. Postseason awards going to be announced on Thursday, or the balance of postseason awards. And of the 6 major awards, Rick Tocchet has already been awarded the Jack Adams for Coach of the Year, and Alexander Barkov, the Selke, for the top defensive forward. So I'm just going to rattle off the other four. Give me your pick. Calder for Rookie of the Year. It's Connor Bedard, Brock Faber, and Luke Hughes. What do you got?
There's no chance it'll be anybody but Bedard. I don't think there isn't anybody that would. Those other two players are very good and had good seasons, but Bedard is so far ahead of everybody else.
Agree on that one. Vezina, top goalie, and we have to remember, given the disaster in the playoffs for Winnipeg, that this is regular season only. Top goalie Sergei Bobrovsky of Florida, Thatcher Demko in Vancouver, and Collar Hennebuck for Winnipeg.
Okay, I have a little bit of insight into this because the Vezina Trophy is voted for by the general managers. And when I was general manager, I voted for the Vezina Trophy. And what you did was you took the stats and you looked at the stats and who had the best season. And basically, that's who you voted for. And the best season on paper by far is Hellebuck. He had the best numbers. So that's who I would say is going to win it.
And I'm going to agree with you on that one as well. Norris Trophy, top defenseman, Quinn Hughes, Roman Josi, Cale Makar.
Cale Makar is one of my favorite players in the NHL to watch. I love the guy, and his numbers were really good this year. He scored the most goals of any defenseman, but the most points was by Quinn Hughes. And a better plus minus by Quinn Hughes. And I think he led the Vancouver Canucks to a season that nobody saw coming. So in my book, I think Quinn Hughes is going to win that.
We're going to differ here. I like the totality of Makar's game, and he's getting my vote for this year. And finally, the Hart. And there were probably 5 players that were worthy to become finalists, and ultimately Nikita Kucherov and McKinnon and Connor McDavid.
And I'm going to say McKinnon, the assistant captain in Colorado, is going to win it this year. He hasn't won it. He's been runner-up for it a number of times, and he hasn't won it. And I think his season statistically was outstanding this year. And so even though it's easy right now to say McDavid, we've got to remember what you said a couple of seconds ago, which is this is regular season only. And I think McKinnon had the best regular season of those 3.
Nathan McKinnon is clearly one of the most dynamic players that we have seen, just in terms of speed and power and skill, and it's an unbelievable package. But my vote is going to go for Nikita Kucherov, and I know that he may not be a fan favorite of the media because of some of the antics at the All-Star game and, shaded the Canadians after they won the Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. And maybe those are some points that go against him. But I also believe that there's no way Tampa Bay makes the playoffs this year without Kucherov. And if you're looking at the player that is the most valuable to his team, I'm siding with Kucherov for this year. This is the human side of the story, brought to you by the Game 7 group. And so often we like to look at players meeting the moment in Game 7, but let's give a big shout out to Paul Maurice, who wins his first Stanley Cup after 26 years behind the bench in Game 7, pulling his team together, because succeeding requires the best of teamwork. At the Game 7 group, transforming individuals into cohesive groups allows every team the potential to achieve extraordinary results. Game 7 Group offers various services such as team building events, plus coaching and speaking engagements aimed at improving team dynamics, productivity, and overall performance. We all want to succeed in the big moment. Check out the Game 7 Group website at game7group.com/NHL Wraparound to learn more. Right now, a special incentive offer awaits our podcast listeners. Take your team to the next step. The Game 7 Group will get you there.
Vic, Paul Maurice did a magnificent job with the Florida Panthers for 2 years in a row now, but achieving the ultimate in Game 7.
He certainly did. And just a little bit of background, because he had to stop playing when he was playing for the Windsor Spitfires in the OHL in juniors. He was actually originally a Philadelphia Flyers draft pick back in 1985. He was the 252nd and last pick. So if this was the NFL, he would have been Mr. Irrelevant. But after his eye injury, he got into coaching with Tom Webster in Windsor, and then joined the Detroit CompuWare team. They later became the Ambassadors and then the Junior Red Wings in the early 90s. Then got his first NHL job with the Hartford Whalers and then Carolina Hurricanes between 1995 and 2003. After a year in juniors with the Toronto Marlies, he joined the Maple Leafs from 2006 through 2008, and then went back to Carolina 2008 through 2011, and then a year in the Continental Hockey League with Metallurg Magnitogorsk. So that one three times quickly. And then from 2014 to 2021, went to the Winnipeg Jets and appeared maybe a little bit burnt out, but then got the call from Bill Zito, and the rest is history. And just, some of the great numbers for Maurice, as we mentioned, 26 seasons, fourth most wins in NHL history. And interestingly enough, also has more losses than any other coach in NHL history. But he won his last game, and that is the 2024 Stanley Cup on Monday night. So kudos for him. He's just somebody that I think you really want to root for. Phenomenal sense of humor, and hopefully we get him on the show at some point.
And I think maybe the first phone call that Paul Maurice should have made was right away to Peter Karmanos, who was the owner of the Windsor Spitfires, who's a Detroit native. He had the CompuWare minor hockey organization, has put a lot of his own money into Detroit minor hockey, ended up making Paul Maurice the assistant coach, as you said, under Tom Webster there in Windsor. And then it was again Peter Karmanos and Jim Rutherford that made the decision to hire Paul Maurice in his late 20s as the coach of the Hartford Whalers, because Pete Karmanos owned the Hartford Whalers at the time. And it was Pete Karmanos and Jim Rutherford that moved Paul Maurice and the rest of the Hartford Whalers to North Carolina to become the Carolina Hurricanes, first playing in Greensboro. And then Paul's career has gone on from there. So a big shout out to Pete Karmanos and the CompuWare group, and Jim Rutherford, and the old Windsor Spitfires with his teammates of Adam Graves, and just a great guy, and great to see him finally get that Stanley Cup.
And it was really something just to watch him Monday night actually speak to the cup before raising it over his head. And I think he told the cup he's been chasing it for a long time, and thrilled for him that he finally got it. So that'll wrap up our show for this week. We want to put a big thanks out to our sponsors, My Gray and the Game 7 Group. Thank you to our listeners. Please send questions or comments to nhlwraparound@gmail.com. Don't forget our website up and running with all of our episodes, both on audio and video platforms, nhlwraparound.com. Next week, the offseason will be in full swing. NHL draft coming up Friday and Saturday of this week, and free agency kicking off on July 1st, so nothing short of topics to talk about when Neil and I see you next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.